everybody's time constraints, and so I'm going to get started and say good day to everyone. Happy Father's Day. I hope everybody is well and safe, and I'm so glad that you're here at our webinar. Before we start, I want to give you a little bit about Americans for Safe Israel. Um, we were formed in the early 1970s, shortly after the '67 war, and our primary mission is to educate about the need for a whole Israel. We try to educate about the legal, historical, and biblical claim to Israel and Israel's right to reclaim its own homeland. In normal times, AFSI takes 2 chizuk missions a year to reinforce our mission. And 2 ingredients that we always include in our mission are a trip to Har Habayit and a visit with Aharon Pulver. And lately, we've been going to Har Habayit with the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, and we're very lucky today to have Yaakov Hayman with us, who is the director of the Temple Mount Heritage Association. It is a project of the Israel Independence Fund, and Aharon Pulver, who is the executive director, can't unmute me for some reason.
That was not for you. Sorry, Judy.
The Aharon Pulver, who is the executive director of the Israel Independence Fund, continually amazes us with the insider information and the wonderful introductions that he's able to make for us. So I just want to repeat that if you have questions for either of them, they will stop and take questions. Please put them in the chat box, and I will be taking a look at them. And if they're answered as the speaker is speaking, we will, acknowledge that. Otherwise, they will be. I'll try to put them together in some kind of format that makes sense, and we'll try to get everybody's questions answered. So, without further ado, I turn the program over to Yaakov and Aharon.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you very much for organizing this. My parents, they moved to Israel in the year 2000. My father was an adamant supporter of AFSI. All the years he was an American, continued every month until he passed away, every month, monthly contribution to AFSI. Might have been instrumental in their decision to make Aliyah at the age of 79. Okay, yeah. Okay, my personal involvement with the Temple Mount, when I think about it, I've been in Israel now for 33 years. And it took 10 years, I think about it, it's crazy. I'm a religious Jew. It took 10 years of my being in Israel until I even thought of what's going on the Temple Mount. Never even occurred to me. I mean, the brainwashing that has taken place on the Jewish people since 1967 has been, unfortunately, very, very effective. I mean, it's the Arabs above and the Jews below. And I never even considered what it would be like to go up there. Until one day, I was living in Efrat 23 years ago, and I just started looking around on my internet, and for some reason, I thought of the Temple Mount. And I found there was a site for someone who was encouraging Jews to come to the Temple Mount, and he said, according to Jewish law, which in everything that I had learned, it was against Jewish law, so that caught my eye. And I went to that lecture, and that changed everything, because after that lecture, I went up to the Temple Mount, talking about 23 years ago, and I was just incredulous to see what I saw. I mean, I'm living in the Jewish state, a democratic state, and I'm walking on the Temple Mount as if I'm a criminal. I'm being accompanied by police, by Arabs, and I couldn't. On one hand, it was great to be there. On the other hand, what's going on here? I mean, the Jewish democratic state. How can this possibly go on? And one thing led to another. I started organizing groups to go up, and by the year 2000, we already had about 16 yeshuvim, settlements that were taking a month to come to the Temple Mount. We already had hundreds of Jews that were making it part of their monthly life. Moshe Feiglin, if you recall, has gone up every 19th, the 19th of every Jewish month. I was on the Temple Mount last Thursday, and Moshe Feiglin was there. It was the 19th, 19th of the month of Sivan. And so I was glad to see that it's continued. In any case, the years have passed, and I'm not sure how many of the people that are listening are aware of the extent of the discrimination on the Temple Mount and how it's expressed. To Muslims, and only to Muslims, the Temple Mount is open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Jews and non-Muslims can go up 5 days a week, Sunday through Thursday, in the morning for a few hours, an hour in the afternoon. There's nine gates to the Temple Mount. Muslims can go through 8. We can go through 1. When you go on the Temple Mount, if you're identified as a religious Jew, you have a kippah, or if a woman has a hair covering, you can't walk around freely on the Temple Mount like any other visitor, including non-Jews. You have to stick to a very, very strict path, and you can't deviate from it. Now, in addition to those things, clearly they don't allow prayer. You can't take any religious artifact on the Temple Mount, a siddur, absolutely nothing. My father, he didn't believe me when I was telling him about the fact that you can't even take a small book, a Hebrew book on the Temple Mount. So I said, Dad, let's go up to the Temple Mount. You'll put a small book of Tehillim, of Psalms, in your pocket, those very small ones. And when I give you the signal, take it out and see what happens. So he did that. And within minutes, he was surrounded by police. A man who's 79 years old, doesn't even speak Hebrew. He was told to put it back or he'd have to remove from the mount. Now, in top of those things that I've mentioned, the police feel free to instigate any other kinds of things that they wish. Just last week also, there was a woman who, because it's hot, so people take water with them on the Temple Mount. She had a bottle, a glass bottle. So the policeman, Jewish policeman, looked at the bottle and said, that bottle can be used for wine. And wine, the Muslims prohibit drinking of wine. So you have to get rid of that bottle. She said, but it's water. It's a water bottle. The policeman didn't desist. She was forced to remove her bottle from the Temple Mount. I mean, these kinds of things. There's water fountains on the Temple Mount. Jews are not allowed to drink from the water fountains. I mean, it reminds me. I grew up in America. I remember I was a very small child before 1960, but I remember those kinds of things. And I remember sitting before my black and white TV screen in 1960 in California, and when they forced a white school to open up to black kids, and I was very proud of my country. I thought, that's how you do sovereignty. You have to enforce it, because if you don't enforce it, it's not there. And that's the opposite of what's going on in the Temple Mount. There has been apparently secret agreements that have been made between Netanyahu and the Jordanians that we don't really know the particulars. We also know, I've heard this from very well-placed Likud minister, who will remain unnamed for now, who said to me that Netanyahu it's simply not on his agenda. The Temple Mount does not concern him. And that's regardless of your political party, I mean, that's a very upsetting thing. I mean, you're talking about the most holy place to the Jewish people in the world, and it doesn't concern the prime minister. So, and it's not just the prime minister we're talking about, it's also the courts. I mean, Aharon knows that we went to the courts a number of times, and the last time we went to the court was to put in a atira. How do you say atira in English?
Appeal.
An appeal. I'm forgetting my English. I've been here so many years. So we put an appeal about all these different things, all these different discriminations that are going on in the Temple Mount. And the head of the police district, Jerusalem Police District, he lied. I mean, one lie after the other. And the judges were very happy to hear those lies, because it just meant that they could continue. Either they accept a version which is not truth, or they just say it's not our concern, it's the concern of the state. As long as the state does nothing, then we're not the address. You have to go back to the state. And the other problem is the rabbis. Even there are very prominent rabbis who are in favor of going up to the Temple Mount, the chief rabbinate is not. And it's important to realize the chief rabbinate since 1967 did not have one discussion, halachic discussion about the Temple Mount. I mean, it's clear that they're going, they're motivated by political things, and they're not interested in opening up the discussion. But what's happening is that more and more Jews are coming to the Temple Mount. This I was told actually when I mentioned that I went up 23 years ago for the first time. And I asked the rabbi that I was with, what do you think is going to bring a change? He said, there's only one thing that will bring a change. More and more Jews. Because as more and more Jews come here, it doesn't matter who they are, not the rabbis, not the prime minister, they can't be indifferent. There's an example of that, by the way, last Jerusalem Day, last year, not this year because the Corona, Temple Mount was closed. But last year, it fell during Ramadan. And hundreds of Jews came. Maybe even close to 1,000 Jews came. And they were barred from, the Temple Mount was closed. Now, this is the first time this has happened where there have been so many Jews at the gate waiting to go in, and they don't let them go in. Even Netanyahu was forced, even it was only for 20 minutes towards the end of the morning, he was forced to open up the Temple Mount. So the main thing that we can do to push things ahead is organize more people. All the time, more and more people. We have to do that by, our slogan is, until the Jews come to the Temple Mount, you have to bring the Temple Mount to the people. And that means we have to go see them in their synagogues, in their cultural centers, in their schools. We have to advertise. I mean, most people don't even know about our group, our organization, the Temple Mount Heritage Fund, because we simply don't have the funds to advertise it. And there's so many things that we could do if we just had the funding. One of the things we're trying to get now is the accreditation by the Ministry of Education to become an educational center for the Temple Mount, which would be incredible if we get that. It would help us do all kinds of things that we're not able to do now. I might mention, by the way, that one of the groups that has been established over the last few years is the Students for the Temple Mount. They are actually they work within our group, our organization, but they have done a lot to get non-religious Jews connected to the Temple Mount. Because the Temple Mount is every Jew's home. It's not just religious Jews. And because they are mostly non-religious Jews, but clearly they're very respectful for religious things, but they have been very instrumental in getting a larger portion of non-religious Jews connected to the Temple Mount. They're actually doing something now which should be very interesting. I don't know if people are aware of the fact that on the entrance to the Temple Mount, there's a sign by the Rabbanut saying that entrance to the Temple Mount is strictly forbidden by Jewish law, which is clearly not the case. I mean, we know that the rabbis 2,000 years ago went into the Temple Mount, and the Rambam actually in his 14 books of Jewish law indicates exactly how to go into the Temple Mount. So it's clear, anybody that says that it's against Jewish law is simply not being accurate. But they have this monopoly, the Rabbanut, and they have this sign which irritates everybody that goes in, and especially the yeshiva students that go to the Temple Mount, and their rabbi at their yeshiva is in favor of going to the Temple Mount. And they see this sign that is against Jewish law. And so what are they supposed to think about their rabbi? So there's a group of rabbis who are in favor of going to the Temple Mount, and they are sending a letter now. The idea being that sign, it turned out the students of the Temple Mount did some research, and they found that sign is illegal. The city of Jerusalem never gave the Rabbanut a license to put up that sign. So the idea being, well, then what if we put up a sign that says that it's a mitzvah, it's perfectly permissible according to Jewish law to go up to the Temple Mount? Will they take it down? And if they take it down, well, they'll have to take down the other sign as well. Otherwise, it's arbitrary enforcement of the law. Those are the kinds of things that the students do to kind of really pump up public reactions to us going up there. So what we're trying to do now, we have offices in Jerusalem. We opened up our offices this past year. We're hoping to do courses, seminars. We have guides. Aharon has been indispensable in helping us fund those guides now for almost 3 years. Every day, every morning, every afternoon, there's guides of the Temple Heritage Fund that go up to the Temple Mount. There are eyes on the Temple Mount that we can take pictures, the pictures that you have seen here today. And we have guys there every day. And that's due to Aharon's help and be able to pay their salaries. And we're hoping to expand, as I've said. We need to do advertising. We have to go all over the country with speakers and courses and radio programs. And we're hoping that we'll be able to do that. So at this point, I'll be happy to take your questions, and we can go from there.
Okay, I don't really see any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Um, so can you give us an idea of how effective the Temple Mount Heritage Association has been in increasing the numbers of Israelis, and how do you connect with other people who have um, how do you connect with other people from out of the country who might want to travel up to the Temple Mount?
In terms of the effect, I mean, one of the things that has been indispensable in increasing the Jewish presence in the Temple Mount is Facebook and WhatsApp. I mean, the fact that we have guides going up every day and photographing and filming, and these photographs and these films spread all over the country. People see, they were never aware of what was going on there, and there's no question it has an impact. I mean, if we did a poll, Aharon remembers the poll we did of almost 7 years ago, and even at that time, 7 years ago, 60% of the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public, was in favor of enforcing Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. I mean, that's incredible. And that's 7 years ago. And I think if we did a similar poll today, that would be much higher. One of the things which I feel bad about is we hear everybody talking about sovereignty today. They're waiting for the next few days to see what the government's going to be doing. There hasn't been anyone talking about sovereignty on the Temple Mount. I heard from another minister in the government about 1.5 years ago that anybody that comes to the prime minister to discuss the Temple Mount is hushed. He doesn't want to hear about it. So I think it's going to take a revolution. I think it's going to take in the sense that there'll have to be a prime minister who's not afraid to confront the issue. And when that happens, I think we'll make more progress. But again, the most important thing is more and more people. In terms of other groups, I think there's pictures. You saw a picture of Rina Ariel in one of the pictures that I sent. Rina Ariel, if you recall, 4 years ago, her daughter was treacherously murdered in her bed in Kiryat Arba. And the whole family is very connected to the Temple Mount. And so every year she leads a group. She goes up to the Temple Mount a lot with her family, but every year she has a special day where she goes up to the Temple Mount with Women for the Temple Mount. Very important movement. And there's other movements. I started a movement myself about the same time that Judy K began the Temple Heritage Fund. I started a movement for establishing synagogues on the Temple Mount. When Judy K went into the Knesset in 2016, he asked me to take the reins on the Temple Mount Heritage Fund. So I'm kind of trying to progress on both fronts. I think the synagogue and the Temple Mount would be an incredible thing. And just to give you an example in terms of how the Israeli government is suppressing these things, there's a very, very well-known philanthropist who came to Ariel Sharon and offered him $100 million to build a synagogue in the Temple Mount. And Ariel Sharon refused. He says, we don't need it. So, I mean, we are working against incredible odds, and I think we will succeed. By the fact that we have more and more Jews demanding to have their rights met, we're going to succeed. It's just a matter of time. I remember I was asked by a policeman on the Temple Mount, what's your goal? What is your goal here? I said, it's really simple. Our long-term goal is to have Beit Mikdash, the temple. But our short-term goal is to get to a point where we're 100, 200,000 Jews coming up here a year, and then you can't tell us what to do. He didn't have a whole lot to say to that.
I have a couple of questions that have to do with the Jordanian control on the temple, on Har HaBayit. And one is, how did we let the mosque stay there in the first place? And then also, from Glenn Richter, how does the destruction of evidence of the temples by the Waqf still continue?
Yeah, no, it's a terrible thing. In terms of the mosque, I think in 1967, Israel itself had no idea really what was going on. The government was astounded at what they accomplished and didn't know how to react. I think if they had removed at that point in time the mosque, probably would have gone. It's now not something which is possible. It's also not necessary. The fact is, it's not necessary. We don't have to remove at this point in time. We do not have to remove the mosque in order to have hundreds of thousands of Jews going to the Temple Mount. It doesn't. And for people that are not familiar, the Temple Mount is, if you're familiar with the Western Wall courtyard, the Temple Mount is maybe 10 times the size. and most of it is open area. So there's no conflict between leaving the buildings there, and even building, by the way, building synagogues in the Temple Mount. There's plenty of room. So that's not our problem. And the problem is just getting the national will to do what has to be done. It's simply lacking. And what was your second question?
I guess you mentioned this already, but the fact that most rabbis in the USA, Orthodox rabbis, tell their members not to go up on the Temple Mount, and there's that sign that you mentioned about not doing that. Is there a lot of work to be done to counter that kind of thing?
Mike, I don't think the need is to concentrate on the rabbis. Because the rabbis are not saying what they're saying for religious reasons. I was once at a lecture from a Haredi rabbi in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And he said, anybody that tells you that according to Jewish law, it's not permissible to go to the Temple Mount, he's simply convoluting Jewish law, totally convoluting it. Clearly, we have to go up in a certain way. We have to go to a mikvah. There's certain places we're not allowed to go, mainly the center. 90% of the Temple Mount is permissible if we go into a mikvah. 90%. It's only where the temple itself stood, that's forbidden. The rabbis are, it's pretty much, I like to make it, it's similar to what happened in Europe 100 years ago, where the rabbis, most of the rabbis said it's forbidden to go up to Israel until the Mashiach comes. There was no Jewish law that said that, but it was a political thing being against the Zionists. I mean, if the Zionists are going to Israel, we certainly can't be with them. And it's something similar with the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is more or less something of the religious Zionists. So the Haredim, they can't be part of that because it's a problem. But there's even more and more Haredim going up to the Temple Mount. It's incredible to see. The younger generation, particularly, we see young Haredim going up to the Temple Mount. There's even a yeshiva of the Temple Mount that was started, and they go up every day. So, I mean, there are cracks in those prohibitions which are becoming more and more apparent.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Hayman. You're not rabbi. I'm sorry.
And there's one other thing I just wanted to answer. One other thing I wanted to answer. One other thing I wanted to answer is what you said in terms of helping other people of the world. You please, Judy, you can pass my phone, my WhatsApp to anybody who's interested, and anybody who comes to Israel by themselves, with a group. I'll be more than happy, just like I've done with your group, to set up a time to go up with them to the Temple Mount.
Okay. So now, I don't want to run out of time. Aharon Pulver is the executive director, and he's really the mover and shaker behind the Israel Independence Fund. And I just want to make the point that he's working with the Israel Independence Fund. Most of the board of directors of the Israel Independence Fund are Americans, and we are backers of Aharon's visions. So, Aharon, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what is happening these days in Israel and your vision?
I'd be happy to the best I can. First of all, I want to thank you, Judy, for inviting me and for inviting Yaakov to join you and our friends in AFSI today here on this webinar. AFSI is one of the most amazing American organizations I've ever come across. I don't know of another organization that travels through the length and breadth of Israel fearlessly, visiting sites that most Jewish organizations would never take people to. For those of you who haven't participated in an AFSI trip, please God, there'll be one soon. After the fear of Corona has passed us and after the dangers have passed us, and you'll all be able to visit us again in Eretz Yisrael. I hope that day will come soon. I also want to thank Yaakov for participating today. The Israel Independence Fund has funded and incubated the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation since it started. And the effort our efforts on the Temple Mount grew out of, as Yaakov said, tremendous frustration that in effect Israeli sovereignty does not exist on the Temple Mount, and that Jewish civil and religious rights in the most basic sense are abrogated daily on the Temple Mount without any rhyme or reason or adherence to Israeli law. the situation has become so absurd, as Yaakov related to you, that the Supreme Court, in a relatively easy, flippant manner, accepts lies about the Temple Mount in order to brush away our appeals for the enactment of Jewish civil and religious rights on the Temple Mount. I'll give you a simple example. The Israel Independence Fund and the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation jointly appealed to the Supreme Court, stating clearly that the branding of Jews according to their dress, whether they're as to them being religious or not religious, is against civil rights. When Jews go up to the Temple Mount, there are two lines. One line for people who look Orthodox and one line for people who don't look Orthodox. Everybody who's gone to the Temple Mount has seen those two lines. Well, the police, in a Jackie Mason-esque move, walked into the Supreme Court and said, there are no two lines. And the Supreme Court agreed, despite the fact that if they would have left their bench and driven for 15 minutes, they would have seen with their own eyes that there are in fact two lines, that Jews are tagged as to whether they're Orthodox or not Orthodox according to their dress. If they would have taken a look at the video evidence that we submitted to them in 79 individual videos, they would have seen that that second line in fact exists, that Jews are in fact selected according to their dress as to whether they're Orthodox or not, with the Orthodox Jews being subject to very intensive, intrusive body searches, and the non-Orthodox Jews not being subjected to those searches. It was clear what was going on. The Supreme Court of Israel was caving into political pressure and caving into pressure from the police in order to deny Jews their civil and religious rights. On that basis, Little Rock, Arkansas would never have been integrated. When President Eisenhower called out the National Guard to ensure that Black children could attend an all-white school in Little Rock, Arkansas, he showed the American public that there would be no debate over basic civil and religious rights as long as he was president of the United States. What we need is a political answer to this issue. As Yaakov mentioned, we need a prime minister who understands that the civil and religious rights of Jews on the Temple Mount may not be abrogated because the end result of that is the abrogation of Jewish civil and religious rights throughout the land of Israel. It was the High Commissioner of the British Mandate who stated clearly, and he was correct, that whoever controls the Temple Mount controls what he defined as Palestine. And he was not wrong in that assertion. Additionally, if there is going to be any modus vivendi between the Jews and the Arabs in this land, it has to start on the Temple Mount. It can't end on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount can never remain the last issue addressed by politicians in discussing a modus vivendi between Jews and Arabs. It has to be the first issue, because until the Arabs understand that sacred space in this country, by necessity, ultimately has to be shared as a first step towards some type of modus vivendi, there will be no peace in Israel. There will be no peace in the region. The Israel Independence Fund, which was founded in 2007, has funded projects like the Temple Mount Initiative and incubated dozens of projects throughout the years in order to strengthen the Jewish and Zionist ethos of the country. While Israel is strong and vibrant, and Baruch Hashem, Israel has a strong army, and its youth are dedicated to the defense of the country, our enemies have astutely discerned that the weak link in our defense is through the back door, is through trying to change Israel's basic society from a Jewish society and a Zionist society to a society devoid of Jewish content and devoid of Zionist content, to a society that no longer believes that Aliyah is a supreme goal of our being here, but rather immigration and how many immigrants we could absorb should replace the concept of aliyah, from a society that defines the basic rights of any Jew to come to this country and receive citizenship, to redefining Israel as a state of all its citizens. We have seen over the past 10 years over $250 million poured into this country by the New Israel Fund, by George Soros, by the European Union, even by Qatar and the Turks, in order to destroy the Jewish and Zionist connection to this country and weaken Israel's society from within by convincing many of our more naive citizens that the definition of Israel as a state of all its citizens will actually be a panacea to all the problems in the Middle East. It won't be. The only thing it will facilitate is the end of Jewish independence in the land of Israel. The Israel Independence Fund is dedicated to funding those organizations that provide real answers on the ground that address the most sensitive issues we're facing today. One of those most sensitive issues, apropos to what's going on in the United States, is the attempt by the most insidious funders in the world, George Soros included, of importing into Israel Black Lives Matter as an attempt to separate Ethiopian Jewry, who number approximately 180,000 souls in Israel today, from Klal Yisrael, from the body of the Jewish people, by convincing Ethiopian Jews that Israeli society is inherently racist and will never accept them. In fact, Israel society is the only nominally, let's call it white society in the history of mankind to reach out to an African population and bring them to a different country as brothers and sisters and not as slaves. It's never happened in world history before. How could we be defined as a nation that wants to enslave them and keep them down? On the other hand, there are very sensitive issues in this country about racism. There is racism in Israel. There is racism where people don't accept Ethiopian Jews as Jews. There is racism where people don't want necessarily Ethiopian Jews as their neighbors, but I'm proud to say that incidents like that are far and few. I can't even count them on my hands and fingers. I won't deny that they're there, but they're certainly not there to the extent that they exist in the United States or in other countries. And there's certainly no justification for Ethiopian Jews to feel that they're not part of Klal Yisrael. On the other hand, if you pour enough money into a problem, or if you pour enough money into an issue, you'll create a problem. And that's exactly what George Soros and the New Israel Fund and the insidious funders in the European Union have done in terms of the Ethiopian Jewish community in Israel. They're pouring money into that community, creating NGOs that are actively convincing them that, yeah, you guys suffer from racism. Despite the fact that the minister of immigrant absorption in Israel is an Ethiopian immigrant, despite the fact that Baruch Hashem today we have 3 Ethiopian members of Knesset, despite the fact that Sahel is loaded with Ethiopian officers and soldiers, despite the fact that we see Ethiopian Jews actively participating in every area and endeavor in the state of Israel, despite the fact that Israel embraced Ethiopian Jews as brothers and sisters, these people are pouring money into the country to convince them that they're not part of the Jewish people, that the Jews brought them here to exploit them. And unfortunately, they're making inroads in the Ethiopian Jewish community. And one of the ways they're doing it, by the way, is using the massive number of illegal infiltrators in South Tel Aviv, who are Sudanese and Somali, in order to try to create a bridge between Black populations in Israel that suffer from Israeli racism, trying to include Ethiopian Jews under the rubric of Africans who are simply exploited by a white society. In order to combat this, we found a little niche. And this little niche is amazing. In discussions with Ethiopian Jewish leaders, in discussions with educators in Israel, the Israel Independence Fund decided to go into an area of endeavor that nobody's even thought of. That's very simply to provide Ethiopian Jewish teens with full scholarships to attend the March of the Living in Poland. We do this because we are convinced, and they come home convinced, by the way, and we've done this for 3 years already, and for 3 years we've seen amazing results from the program, that Ethiopian Jews see their struggle for freedom, their struggle to make Aliyah, their struggle to come to Zion and Jerusalem as part of a worldwide Jewish struggle, that the fires they went through in Ethiopia, the discrimination they went through in Ethiopia, the pain they went through walking through Sudanese deserts to come to the land of Israel, literally on foot, is no different than the struggle to survive the Shoah, is no different than the struggle of European Jews and Jews from Arab countries and Jews from North Africa to come to the land of Israel and be free, to breathe free air for the first time. In the program that we started in providing these scholarships for Ethiopian young people, we've seen that amongst the Ethiopian young teenagers who've traveled to Poland, they all come back expressing the same ideals, that they've never felt more a part of the Jewish people, they've never felt more a part of a worldwide Jewish struggle, they can't wait to go into the army to defend this country and protect this country with their lives if necessary, because they understand better than ever the importance of the land of Israel and the state of Israel, not only to Ethiopian Jews, but to Jews all over the world. That's the type of creative work that you and I and all our friends can do in order to ensure that the George Soroses and the New Israel funds and European governments no longer succeed in trying to rip apart the state of Israel and tear from us the Jewish soul and the Zionist soul of this country. I would urge you all to consider taking part in our efforts to help us to ensure that there are guides on the Temple Mount every day, in order that Jews going up to the Temple Mount hear the true narrative of the Temple Mount, that they hear for the first time what the Temple Mount means to the Jewish people in history. You know, many times Yaakov and I have been up to the Temple Mount and we hear other guides walking past us, even Israeli guides, even Jewish guides, telling people, well, we're here on a Muslim holy site. Well, it's true that the Muslims built mosques on a Jewish holy site and that they consider it holy, but that's the true context. That is the true context, and that's not given to people who go up to the Temple Mount if they don't go up with our guides, which is exactly why we have guides there, to be able to tell the truth. And this is a free service that we offer anybody who comes to the Temple Mount. It's a service that costs quite a lot of money, frankly. And we need your help in raising those funds to ensure that people who do go up to the Temple Mount hear the truth about the Temple Mount. It's not just about providing a free service. It's about ensuring that when people go up to the Temple Mount, they hear what the Temple Mount really is, that they see with their own eyes where the Holy Temple was, and hear from our guides what the true history of the Temple Mount is, that Jews have always been going up to the Temple Mount. Although it be under restrictions by Muslim rulers, throughout the centuries, Jews have had a presence on the Temple Mount. There have been times where even under Muslim rule, there was a synagogue on the Temple Mount. Our efforts in the Temple Mount, by the way, don't stop at the gates with guides. We've created a Knesset lobby for the Temple Mount. And we, Yaakov and I and others, have been working with ministers who sit at the government table. We've been working with members of Knesset in order to ensure that the Temple Mount stay on the front burner. And thank God we've been able to ensure that the Temple Mount has stayed on the front burner. Even though the Prime Minister regularly rejects all our efforts, he understands, both from within his own party, within the central committee of his own party, and from within the government, at the government table with the ministers sitting around him. There are ministers who are determined to see change, and they're not willing to take the issue off that front burner. And that is thanks to diligent work that we've been doing for many years in reaching out to members of Knesset and reaching out to government ministers and explaining to them very simply that this is an issue of Jewish civil and religious rights that can no longer be delayed. By the way, for those of you who may have heard that the issue with the Temple Mount and Jews going up to the Temple Mount will start World War III, I just want to remind everybody that I heard that not too long ago about transferring the American embassy to Jerusalem, and I'm hearing it now about the issue of sovereignty. And neither the issue of sovereignty or the issue of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount are going to cause World War III for a very simple reason. And the simple reason is this, that when the Jews stand firm in demanding sovereignty in their land, we succeed. If we show a weak back and a weak spine, we won't. And that's been proved historically, time and time and time again. It's galoi, it's for all to see. We simply have to stand firm in maintaining Israel's Jewish and Zionist ethos, in demanding Jewish civil and religious rights on the Temple Mount, in reaching out to more and more people throughout the United States, Canada, Britain, wherever they'll hear our voice, in order to help us, in order to fight back. Unfortunately, the Israel Independence Fund doesn't have funders who, like George Soros, write $10 million checks in order to create sedition in Israel. We count on people who write the small checks. We count on people like you. So I would urge you all to look at our website, and our website address is very easy to remember. It's www.fundisrael.org. Take a look at more of the things we do, more of the outreach we do, more of the creative work we do on the ground, and you'll see that you'll probably want very much to join in partnership with us in order to further succeed in what we're doing, in order to reach out to more and more people, more and more Israelis, get them on board, and join us in incubating creative organizations like Moreshet Harabait, like the Temple Mount Foundation, in order to ensure that Israel's security tomorrow is as secure as it is today. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question that was asked earlier by Steve Schultz, who has accompanied us on at least one mission. And it's a question that's been bothering me. He says, I am a non-observant American Jew. In the US, it would be considered clearly illegal for there to be a public space where one religion can pray, but not another. Other than status quo and Jordanian sensibilities, why does a right-wing government not address this? From what I have read, Jordan needs Israel more than the reverse. This does not represent a strong Jordanian strategic interest. So why not push this?
There are a number of ways to answer that question. It's a very good question. First of all, let's start off with the Jordanians. The Jordanians are not really Jordanians. There's no such thing as Jordania. The Hashemite kingdom was created in 1922 by the British because one of the Al-Husseini brothers from Saudi Arabia didn't have a kingdom to rule. And the British, who bet on the Al-Husseini clan over the Saud clan during the Arabian Peninsula's civil war, needed to give out treats to the three brothers who were involved in supporting British interests. One of the treats they gave was 78% of the mandatory territory of Palestine as defined by the League of Nations. The Hashemites have long maintained that they're direct descendants of Muhammad. As such, they see themselves as custodian of all the holy sites of Islam in the land of Israel and in Jordan itself. Actually, in Jordan, there are no holy sites to Islam. The only holy sites that anybody who's a Muslim would consider being of significance are in Yerushalayim. Maintaining some type of custodianship to the Hashemites is actually very much in their interest. However, and by the way, there is nothing in the Israel-Jordanian peace treaty that gives the Jordanians anything but quote unquote special consideration in Jerusalem. Special consideration, according to the terms of the peace agreement with the Jordanians, is a term that's so broad you could drive a truck through it. It doesn't mean that they necessarily need to have custodianship over the Temple Mount. But here's an idea, and it's very simple. And this is what I've said to people, and they raise their eyebrows and say, that's interesting. We could think about that. The fact is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is situated on the Herodian extension of the Temple Mount, is not necessarily considered holy space by Jews. Historically, the Herodian extension is not part of the original Temple Mount. For the Jordanians to have custodianship over a building on the extended Temple Mount is something that we could live with. They have convinced, unfortunately, the Israeli government that, as they try to convince everybody, that Al-Aqsa is in fact the entire 140 dunam site. That's not the case. Al-Aqsa is a building. And I haven't heard anybody, I haven't heard a Jew yet say they can't go in there and pray. They could go in there and pray. Absolutely. And they could even determine what color rugs they pray on. Nobody's saying no. But what we're against is them controlling the entire site. The entire site of 140 dunams does not have to be under Hashemite rule. Now, why did the Jews allow it? Good question. Bibi Netanyahu is firmly convinced, apparently, that the best way to negotiate with the Jordanians is to go in and say, all right, I'll give it to you, but let me tell you what I really need. Frankly, I would walk in more like a mafiosi from the Bronx and say, listen, this country is a family business. You people are really doing good. You want to keep the family business going? I'm okay with that. But these are my conditions. And if we had a prime minister who went in and talked like that, then I think the end result would be very different indeed. But the prime minister, for at least at this moment, seems to feel that giving away Jewish civil and religious rights on the Temple Mount is part of a greater dialogue that serves our interests. I don't believe that for a second. I think that whenever you give a dictator a present on a silver platter without making clear demands, you're being naive.
So the question on everybody's mind is sovereignty going to happen? Is the Israeli government going to apply Israeli law to parts, or maybe all, or to parts of Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, or is it a bluff? What's going on?
I understand from conversations that I've had that there are two camps within the American administration. There is one camp, David Friedman and Pompeo, who want to give the green light to the Israeli government plan. However, there is another camp led by Jared Kushner, who only wants to see Israeli law extended to areas of Judea and Samaria as part of a greater deal. I don't know which way it's going to swing in terms of the United States. I do know that the current government will probably acquiesce to American considerations. And if the Trump administration holds with the Jared Kushner position, then the issue is in very deep trouble, because we all know that the Arabs will never agree to the terms of the Trump deal, and demanding a dual recognition of the deal as part of the deal itself, and demanding that Arab acquiescence is essential will kill the idea completely. We can only hope that the American administration at this juncture understands that this is something that's natural. It's something that ultimately will bring greater stability to the Middle East. It's something that's bound to happen, and that as Friedman and as Pompeo hold, it's something that the Israeli government should be given a green light to do as they see fit.
So, I'm gonna skip back to another point that was made by Norma Siegel. She wanted to know whether the Temple Mount is kind of a microcosm of the way Jerusalem was before the Six-Day War. Should Israel be emphasizing the general religious freedom angle that in order to, I guess, have a decent PR position in the world? It doesn't, to counter the apartheid type of allegations.
Well, I think that there's no question that if we had a prime minister who was in favor of enforcing Jewish rights in the Temple Mount, he would have a very easy way to do it by simply saying, we are simply making all religious rights permissible to all religions on the Temple Mount. There's no reason whatsoever that Jews in their country should be excluded from that. There's many, many ways to sell this. The problem is the wish, the desire to sell it. I go back to, if you remember what happened a few years back when there was a murder on the Temple Mount, and they set up magnometers for, as there is, the Jews, every Jew that goes to the Temple Mount has to pass a magnetic check. Arabs don't. And they set that up to check all Arabs that come in. Now, at the beginning, the Arabs were very hostile to this. There was the Jerusalem police minister, and I had many things against him, as I mentioned in the court case. But actually, on this thing, he was very well. He enforced, and for many days, Muslims didn't go to the Temple Mount. They said, we will not go through the magnetic check to go to the Temple Mount. So he said, so don't go in. Their hostility was going down. And then Netanyahu came in and said, take away the magnetic checks, let them go in. I mean, every step of the way where there's a reason and an ability to make equality, it's short-circuited. As they say, the fish from the head.
Right. So, Ann Stacy wants to know, do the other tour guide leaders, Christian and Jewish groups, welcome the free guides from the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation? Do they turn tours over to you, or do they choose to keep their groups to themselves?
It's mostly indifference. There's mostly indifference. We have really very little contact with them. There was a time
Christian and Jewish groups?
Yeah, absolutely. There's very little. They don't see us as a threat. I mean, if you look at the lines that are going in of the Jews that are going in, we're talking about tens and hundreds, and usually every day. We're not talking about the Corona and post-Corona era. There was always a line of 1,000 non-Jews from all over the world going to the Temple Mount. So they didn't see themselves being threatened in any way in terms of their living. And mostly, I would say indifference. We don't have much to do with each other.
What do you think, and this is for either one of you who wants to grab this, if and when Gantz takes over as prime minister in 18 months or 17 months now, do you think things will be better or worse on Har HaBayit?
I think things will probably be the same, unless Gantz tries to move ahead with some type of permanent arrangement that would officially give the Arabs control of the Temple Mount. According to Israeli law, despite the fact that Jewish civil and religious rights are abrogated on the Temple Mount daily, and disrespected on the Temple Mount daily, the Temple Mount is part of the state of Israel. The danger of a Gantz government is that he would try to negotiate some type of long-standing agreement that would secede, and that would cede the Temple Mount officially to a foreign entity. There's always a danger of that, but I don't think Gantz will get to that point. I'm not so sure the government will last, and I'm not so sure that Gantz will ever be prime minister. But one cannot expect a former general who proudly said that he endangered Israel's soldiers in order to ensure that there would be no civilian casualties to really respect Jewish civil and religious rights, particularly on sensitive issues.
Okay. So we've kind of come to the end of our time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank Yaakov and Aharon for giving us a ton of information and a lot of questions. If you would like, I'd be happy to relay your email addresses to our participants so that they can have, I'm sure everybody has follow-up questions. I know that we have a virtual Celebrate Israel parade at 1 o'clock. And my guess is that some of the people who are on this call are going to want to watch that. So this might be a good time to grab a little bit of lunch before we start that at 1 o'clock. But again, Aharon and Yaakov, as always, you just are founts of information and knowledge, and we can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to end now.
Thank you.
Shalom l'kulam.
Shalom l'kulam.
Shalom.